Hi, and welcome back. We are excited for you to be joining us for our third session on strategic planning. If you are new to this video cast, know that you missed the first two episodes. You may want to go back and check those out before we delve into today's topic, which is really focused on outlining the course. As we've talked about in the first two sessions, we see strategic planning as having five critical components. The first two are understanding where you're starting from and then figuring out where you want to be at the end of this. In today's session, we're going to talk about outlining the course that gets you from point A to point B. And so, unless you know the road that you're going to be traveling on, I think it's difficult to get from A to B. And so, that's our goal for you today. The point of the third session and the point of outlining the course is really to start having the conversation about actual tactics, the things that you're going to need to accomplish to get you to where you want to be. As opposed to the high level strategy that we've been talking about, where you start at the top of the funnel, we're now whittling our way down to having a 1,000 foot level. The conversation isn't at the 10,000 level, we're now at the 1,000 foot level. So, as we start today, I think we should start with a story that outlines why is it so important to know that the road that you're on. And I think one of the examples that will resonate with all of us is that of Kodak. So in 1975, the head engineer at Kodak invented the first ever digital photography. This was a revelation, and it was something that was absolutely unheard of at the time. And so there became a lot of buzz about the fact that digital photography was now a thing. And so, was this ever going to be a replacement for or in addition to print photography? Nobody knew the answer to that, but Kodak felt pretty certain they had cast their lot in the print photography world, and that was where they were going to be. The path that they were on was the one of print photography. So even though they had now this technology that they had invented and owned, they really weren't interested in pursuing a path towards digital photography. That would have taken them, they felt, off course. And so they continue to run their course along the print photography path. They take a pause about 6 years later and they do a research study to figure out what is all this buzz about digital photography? Is this something that we truly need to be giving some greater consideration to? And what they find out at the time is that it's going to take about 10 years to really effectively transition from print photography to digital photography. And at that point, they again make the commitment to run along the path of print photography. And we all know the lessons learned there that Kodak struggled because they weren't able to adapt their business model to one of digital photography. Now we all have, digital photography on our phone, but there was a time in a not too distant past when many of us had actual digital cameras. Digital photography had its definite moment to shine as a standalone product. But Kodak was so invested in their commitment to being the best in photography that they missed the path that would have led them down the digital photography road. And it could have been as a replacement for, it could have been in addition to, but their tactics were unchanged even as the future of photography changed. And that's where we would say Kodak really stumbled, is that it refused to change the tactics to address what was changing in the market. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be aware of today. If your strategies are to advance health and healing or to make sure that there's equity and access, those strategies are going to have tactics that support them. While your strategy may go unchanged, it's important to recognize that the tactics that you take will continue to change over time. They may change, as we've seen in the last year, within the course of a year. They'll certainly change over the course of 5 years. But there has to be tactics in place that get you started down a path and that continue to evolve over time to support your strategy or even as the market changes. I want to turn it over to Taylor now to talk to us a little bit about these tactics. What do we need to know, Taylor?
Thanks, Amy. Absolutely. So, as Amy said, what we're really going from is we have our what we called our core pillars. And again, we're using terminology that we use. Sometimes it's different, but kind of what we talked about last time, your core pillars. So you're going to have things like value, quality, um, you know, employee satisfaction, those pillars. Then you're going to have your strategies, which are, improve access to care, like Amy just said, or create a workplace that supports diversity and inclusion, those type things. So you're going to have these strategies that are then under your pillars. Now we're talking about the tactics. Now, these are going to be your real meat of your strategic plan, right? This is how you're going to roll this out to your employees and say, this is the action that we're taking here. This is no longer an idea, but a real tactic that you can put into your day-to-day lives. And I think that's what's really important here is you can have different broadness of tactics, and this can be different based on the strategic plan you're creating. If you're creating a strategic plan for your department, tactics are likely going to be a little more granular. But if you're at the hospital level or at a large service line level, you're probably going to see tactics be a little bit broader. And that's when you really are going to find that ownership in your staff to create or to take those tactics and create that day-to-day function. So again, these tactics are going to seem still somewhat broad, but they're really the driving force. And we'll talk again as we continue on about how we kind of create that accountability, et cetera. So, what we really wanted to do today, and I think this is really going to be interesting, is we looked online, and a lot of these strategic plans are available online. People are publishing them. And so looked through some of these that are available online. And I think it's a great example of these are actual strategic plans that exist for health systems. And again, sometimes subcomponents of those health systems. So the first one is St. Michael's Hospital Strategic Plan. Their strategy listed in theirs is advanced systems of care for disadvantaged patients. Again, this kind of goes with the access to care one that we were just talking about. So their pillar, and I don't have this pulled up, but it could have been, again, patient experience or something like that, quality of care or quality. And then your strategy is underneath that. So some of the tactics that they have are define high priority disadvantaged populations that require innovative models of care and system partnerships. Identify and work with partners within the community and health system to redesign, pilot, and evaluate innovative models of care for disadvantaged populations. Again, multiple more examples if you want to go online and look at that one, but just kind of an interesting example there. Similarly, we have Carson Valley Medical Center. Their strategy is to provide the highest standard of care. Again, so what are we looking at here? Probably something that their pillar was quality. And from there, they have provide the highest standard of care. So tactics were establish a lean team to assess and improve potential operational enhancement. They had a focus underneath there. Develop a quality council with a focus on improving patient experience, quality of care, and outcomes. Enhancing physician leadership in driving clinical performance excellence. Quality rounding for quality and departmental leadership. So again, we can step back and we can listen to these and we can say, oh, I see how develop a quality council with a focus on these three things. Now, as a leader, I have a clear direction, right? And we're not laying out, these are going to be your leaders and this is what it all has to look like exactly. There is some still ownership of this initiative there, but that's where we're going. That's what we want you to do. And this is how we're going to achieve these strategies that we have as an organization. The last one I have is Sibley Memorial Hospital, which is part of Johns Hopkins Medicine. It's their nursing strategic plan. So again, this is an example of kind of a subcomponent. And their strategy is become the model for an academically based integrated healthcare delivery and financing system. So again, a broad strategy, right? How do we even begin to do that? Tactics, explore affiliations with area schools of nursing, identify and implement existing tools within Epic. Ensure participation in Johns Hopkins clinical communities, leverage digital technology on website and social media. So again, these are just random examples we found online. Amy and I obviously have lots with our own clients, but these are the type things that are really going to be what you start discussing as different groups. And we'll talk a little bit about those groups and how you really begin implementing this plan. But this is going to be what you roll out to your employees. And so this is so important. And again, this is going to be the driving force. And we've talked about this before, these are going to be different based on the organization. They're going to be different based on the level of granularity of the strategic plan itself. And they're going to be different in different departments. So, you could also have a strategy, for example, and this is just something that we, could happen. It doesn't have to happen necessarily in an organization. This could be something that happens once you implement, but you could have these tactics, right, that are saying improving patient experience, quality of care, and outcomes. Well, then each department's going to take that, right, and they're going to have their own tactics on how they make that happen. So again, I think this is really fluid depending on this type of strategic plan you're coming up with and how you implement it. But just an example of how we are continuing to drill down from that high level down to the more minute level.
I think that's great, Taylor. And one of the things I noticed you saying is tactics with an S on the end, meaning there's never just one tactic, right? There's always a number of things that you need to be focusing on at any given time. And I think that prioritization of tactics is another one of the key elements of this third phase of the strategic planning process. How do you figure out which of the tactics should be your priorities? One of the reasons that we see strategic plans fail is that there's a lack of prioritization regarding the initiatives. And so you either miss a window of opportunity or it never gets done because other things continue to trump it in terms of priority. And so you never get to that item. One of the ways that you combat that is by creating a set of priorities, by assigning ownership and creating accountability around timelines for completion. So, this whole process of strategic planning really rests on being able to mobilize people to take action on both the tactics and the strategies. The example I would give here is that of Tracy Armstrong. Tracy Armstrong is the CEO of Clearance Copyright Center. She started, years and years ago at the age of 21 as a clerk. She was really doing some minimal amount of work for them, but doing a good job at it. A couple years later, she gets a call from her boss who says, Tracy, I'm giving you the tap on the shoulder. We have a huge, large scale implementation, and we need somebody to come in and run it. And I want it to be you. And so Tracy says, okay, I'm willing to do this. What was before her was what we would consider to be an example of the need to eat an elephant, right? And how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time. And that's what Tracy was so great at doing. She took this massive project and said, over the next 18 months, I'm going to break it down into tactics and I'm going to assign people to do these things that need to be done and then hold them accountable for doing it. And in that way, that project, which Tracy later would say was really paramount to the ongoing success of the organization, was something that she was able to pull off. And obviously, that resulted in her being able to continue to work at the organization. She still works with people that helped her on that very seminal project. And obviously, now as the CEO, I think reflects fondly back at that time. But I'm sure it was stressful. And it would have been a lot more stressful if she wasn't able to create accountability about who's going to do what, when are they going to do it, and in what order. And the same thing exists for all of our strategic plans. We need to be able to take the tactics with an S and figure out which of those we're going to make most important, if there's any dependencies between them, how we're going to sequence them. And then we have actual names next to that. And that may be depending upon the size of your organization. It might say, Taylor Cowart next to it, or it might have a department. But the intent is that it's someone whose ultimate responsibility is going to rest with accomplishing that tactic, with whatever it may be. There's always the opportunity to create camaraderie and to generate teams. But at the end of the day, if you're going to eat the elephant, you've got to have somebody who's going to be willing to take each bite. And so that's what we stress in this part of the process, is really making sure that there's somebody with a fork ready, to do all the things that need to be done here. I think, Taylor, you wanted to make one more comment and give one more example before we close today.
Yeah, and I just have to say your story just reminds me of when you were talking about, pointing at someone and saying go do it. I remember taking CPR years ago, and them telling you, if you have to call 911, you have to point to someone in the crowd and say you call 911, because there's all these studies that say if you don't point to someone in the crowd, if you just say blankly somebody call 911, no one's going to do it. And so that's such a great example of, this is your pointing, right? This is saying you call 911, you're in charge of this initiative. But no, absolutely. I'm going to just wrap it up here and talk a little bit about, again, this is the minute part of the strategic plan, right? But it's all part of the holistic strategy and strategic plan. And I think what we find a lot when we do these is, if we've done our job of getting to those strategies, and if we've all as a group really thought these through, the tactics should come naturally, right? Those are the more step-by-step process of getting there. The strategies are the kind of hard, take a look in the mirror moments. And I'm not saying the tactics are necessarily easy, but they should come somewhat naturally in discussions, right? We're really now getting down to the bolts of the matter. So I think a great example of this in someone that just had real strategic vision and execution was Hubert Jolly, who became the CEO of Best Buy. So in 2012, Best Buy was really struggling. Their profits were plummeting. Their sales and stock prices were plummeting because they were competing with giants like Amazon, right? And the strategy that they'd had at a certain time had not worked until, at this point in time. So they had to really have a moment of discussion of where are we going and what do we want to be, right? And so, a lot of times we'll talk about changing your tactics, evolving your tactics, being willing to update them. And sometimes it has to be, we're going to pivot our entire strategic plan. And so this was a pivot our entire strategic plan type moment. And so he came in and he really set out the key goals, right? And it was the Renew Blue transformation strategy. And this is a great example of strategies and then followed up by tactics that they executed very well. And so some of the ones they had were reinvigorate the customer experience. So they implemented a price match policy. They improved the online and in-store shopping experiences. They offered free in-home technology consultations and 24/7 customer tech support. So again, these are tactics that would have been in a strategic plan that they would have talked about, but then all these stores were going out and actually implementing. That's what the instructions they were given, right? If you had just said reinvigorate the customer experience, well, that means very different things to very different people. And so setting those clear tactics is so important. Attract transformational leaders and energize employees. And they expanded training, they expanded benefits, they provided pay time off for part-time workers. Again, all these tactics to support these strategies. And again, you can look this up. It's very interesting, but we all know now, as someone that has bought from Best Buy very recently, they've done an incredible job of coming back kind of from that irrelevance and really doing a good job of having a brick and mortar store that actually competes with these online giants like Amazon because of those effective strategies and tactics that really drove that home. And so again, I think it's important that we understand that these strategies are likely, to my point, they're going to, and to Amy's point earlier, these are going to remain somewhat constant. And our tactics need to be adaptable and willing to change. And these is something we'll talk about in the next session. But really knowing that's kind of going to be what we evaluate in a more ongoing basis so that we can update. Again, I think an excellent one we think about is access to care, right? And I promise you, it was in a lot of people's strategic plans pre-2019. And now we are looking back and seeing that the tactics likely changed a lot because of COVID. And so in 2020, they probably sat back and said, okay, our tactics now, let's update everything about telehealth, right? These are going to look completely different now. And so I just think it's a really good point, and COVID is such an interesting example, and one that we'll probably use for the rest of our lives, of how a given event can change everything, and especially these specific tactics. So again, once you set the strategies, your tactics, you should be able to adjust relatively naturally. They shouldn't require a complete upheaval of your strategic plan. So, you want to figure out where you're going and then continuously work toward that. And then also understand your limitations and boundaries but push yourself. And I think this is where the tactics sometimes fall short of this concept of, I know where I want to go, but I'm going to set maybe tactics that are too easily achievable. We'll talk a little bit more next time about goal setting. But these tactics should be really things that are forward thinking, that are not just continuations necessarily of your same work, but how are we going to drive this forward in a real legitimate way? And then again, taking that, disseminating it to your employees who are going to turn that into those really actionable day-to-day initiatives.
Absolutely. You have said so many things that I would just like to echo. But I think, in summation, what I would say is that as you build your strategic plan, make sure that you leave enough time to develop both your strategies and your tactics. And those tactics obviously have to fit tongue and groove with those strategies. But they also need to have a lot more detail in terms of how they're achieved, who's going to achieve them, and when they're going to achieved by. So in your process, make sure that your strategic planning process has enough of a tactical planning process as well. I think that's important to really maximizing your chances for achieving, what you want to be achieving. I will say that today we spent a lot of time talking about these tactics. As Taylor said, it's the meat of what's often in your strategic plan. And so, what we're going to do is close out today. We'll have two more sessions, as we talked about. Session 4 is going to talk about those midway milestones. And then the fifth one is going to talk about making sure that we have the right resources, whether those are your people or your processes or your technology, any of the things that you need to really make sure you've got the right resources to get you to the finish line. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. If you're just joining us anew here midstream, make sure that you know that there are the first and second sessions that are available for viewing at this point. And we'll certainly look forward to being with you in the fourth and fifth as well. Thanks so much. Bye.